Wheel of Genre, the show for viewers who, every time they hear a joke, say, what did that mean? We are reading every short story in Harlan Ellison's anthology, Dangerous Visions. This is the third story, Frederik Pohl's The Day After the Martians Came, or also known as The Day After the Martians Came. It sounds like the title got changed somewhere in there, probably for the better.
I like the original.
I'm Zach, and this week I'm interested in trying to really nail down what we know about the new wave of science fiction. How does this story add to our understanding of it?
I'm Bob. I'm interested in something similar, Zach. I'm interested in leaving behind Golden Age science fiction and whether or not this story does this. Zach, what happens in this story? What is this story about?
Okay, so the setting is inside of a hotel. The hotel is overflowing with guests, and they are reporters. However, our kind of core group of characters are Mr. Mandala, who appears to be some kind of like manager, owner type. Think of him as like the Mr. Krabs of the setting. And then...
Or the Basil. Faulty Towers.
Yes. And Ernest and Bursey, who are two guys. They're black. They work at the hotel, and, they're doing some of the more, manual type stuff. What's going on in the larger view here is these reporters are there because NASA is coming back from Mars, and it has specimens of Martians. So all these reporters are there. They're watching on the TV what's going on, and they start telling each other these jokes. And it becomes quickly apparent that all the jokes that people are telling about these Martians are really just like recycled racist jokes. And what they've done is they basically just swapped out the target people and replaced it with these Martians.
So we have racism going on. It's a story about racism. It's all centered around these jokes, and it's a strange experience because it should be really exciting. Martians are coming. This is the first time we've had Martian contact, and they are specimens. They are living Martians coming down to Earth, and now all of these reporters, they're so tired of, all the hoopla. They're pretty jaded, but they're just tossing around these terrible jokes. And it's interesting because we don't really get to see much of what the Martians really are. They're described to us, but their bodies seem to be deformed, maybe because of the long journey, and it's hard to tell if they can communicate well or not. But I don't know, Zach, why? You said it might be a new wave story. What to you about this story makes it seem, definitive for new wave? Why do you think Harlan Ellison accepted it?
That's a really good question, and that's something I'm still trying to come to terms with myself.
Okay.
This anthology that we're reading through one story at a time has the reputation of being part of the new wave of science fiction. We've overcome the Golden Age. But what does that mean precisely? One thing I notice about this is that it's Frederik Pohl, and Frederik Pohl is a close friend with Isaac Asimov, the quintessential Golden Age guy. So it's like what you have is, I guess you could say, another Golden Age guy, but he's writing a story that we generally is being published under an anthology that we lump in with the new wave. It just makes me wonder how quickly these labels are breaking down. It seems like it's not the people who make it new wave. Maybe it's more of the concern that makes it new wave.
Other concerns, the attention, the kind of stories they're writing?
I think so. Or maybe there's also an element of the literary character of what they're writing. So if I was to try to retell this story in a Golden Age way, maybe I wouldn't have it just kind of star the manager of a hotel. Maybe I'd have it star the astronaut who gets, who's on this spaceship, and he lands on the planet and he finds these dog-like Martians, and he has to with flippers, and he knows he needs to bring them back to Earth for some reason, but in order to do so, he has to fight off the Grand Martian protectors with a ray gun before he can swoop them up and bring them back to Earth for study and scientific knowledge and advancement, and to make a connection between these two cultures. That's how I would tell it if it was, 1940 or 1950-ish. But what we get with this story is a totally different perspective. It's not the astronaut. It's not the Martian. It's not the reporters who are viewing on this and bringing the story to society. It's the guy at the hotel and his interactions with his staff thinking about what this news will mean for their lives.
So kind of a lame setting, whereas we could have an adventure here. We're just in the mundane hotel. That's New Wave. So that's
Bob,
interesting.
you've cracked
it. Is
it.
Kind of,
New Wave is just lame stories.
It's just boring stuff. No, the stories have been really good, and they have had huge scopes. I mean, we had one about humanity kicking God out of his own creation. That's a big science fiction scope. It's almost like a space opera condensed into 3 pages. But I feel like in this, you're right. It does feel like it's different from Golden Age. But I think the message still feels kind of like Golden Age. It's so positive about what science fiction can do. Because I think at the very end, when Frederik Pohl is talking about why he wrote it, Harlan Ellison is asking all of these authors, please write an afterword and explain why you think your work fits the idea of dangerous visions. Frederik Pohl says, I've heard about this minister. He's got a congregation, mostly white, and he wants to use science fiction to get these white people to care about other people, to develop empathy. So I think the big claim here is science fiction can teach people empathy. It is a major player in literature, and it can change the world. I think science fiction can change the world in Frederik Pohl's mind. And maybe that is what Harlan Ellison is saying too, but it feels like when we talked to Brent from Hugonauts, he was saying that is kind of Isaac Asimov's shtick. He's saying use science, and science will always solve every problem. So it feels kind of too positivist, or not positive, sorry, too happy-go. Sorry, I really need to think about my words before I use them.
Maybe optimistic?
Too optimistic, thank you. Too optimistic. Do you feel like it's his idea of what science fiction can do? Do you buy it? Is it effective in the story?
I think there's a fine distinction to draw here between science can save the world and science fiction can save the world.
Oh,
because
fine,
one is a claim about, the STEM subjects, and the other is a claim about the humanities. And I'm sure if you asked Isaac Asimov, the man who wrote more than 100 books in his lifetime, he would tell you that books are great and books will change people. Books will change individual lives. Books will change societies. But I think that his books aren't trying to enact that change in the stories that he's telling, if that makes sense. Like, I don't get the sense that you read Foundation and you say, my life today is different than the life I lived yesterday before I read Foundation. But maybe with this one, I think Pohl's intention is for you to have read this story and then walked away and said, oh, well, okay, so what is Pohl trying to get us to say? That's a whole maybe other question, but if I was to guess, maybe, racist jokes of any kind are heard and internalized by people around us, and that they're kind of repeated without thought. That's one facet of it. The other facet of it is that humanity seems to always other something, to create an outside social group with which to define itself. And the fundamental message of this story, that the note that it ends on, is these guys, Ernest and Burzy, they say that the Martians coming will make a huge difference to them. And by that, it presumes we can presume it means that their social standing will have risen up because there is someone else, something else, which has become the outcast in the society, and that would be the Martians.
Which feels kind of cutthroat. I was saying earlier it's optimistic, but that seems kind of negative. Because, there's all of these racist jokes, but Mr. Mandala is the one who's most frowned upon because he's yelling at Ernest and Burzy this whole time. And even though the guests are saying these terrible jokes, they look at Mandala and think, ooh, this is bad behavior. And so these guys are right. Now we've displaced all of these racist jokes. We can put them all on the Martians. Like you said, these are just cookie-cutter racist jokes, but they're obviously for all different races. But now it's just, and they don't apply at all to these Martians who we don't even know what they look like. They don't know what they're like. It's just totally out of context. And it is interesting that now we're going to just make them the scapegoat for all of our racism and just get rid of the Martians, or do whatever they're going to do with the Martians. But now the Martians are the only target. It seems kind of cutthroat that now welcomed someone back in, but now we've said, hey, good opportunity. Let's put all of the hate that way. How do you feel? Is that Frederik's point? What's going on there?
I ran across a fun descriptor for this story, and it was called, the description was, it was a dystopian satire. And I didn't think at first that was the best description of it. But I think it is a really interesting one that makes me think of it in a different way. One, because I probably wouldn't have thought of it as a dystopia, but I think it kind of is depicting a dystopian society. It just happens to be, it happens to be the non-science fiction part of this story. But the satire element, I think, is where the optimism comes in. Because when we satirize something, what we're doing is we are picking out something that we think is wrong or foolish or silly, and we are highlighting those aspects. And I think that fundamentally the goal of satire is to incite change. Yeah, I don't know. It's hard with this one. To go back to what you were saying earlier, is it optimistic? It might be, just because the act of satire seems predicated on the idea that things can change for the better.
Okay. This idea of satire and what the genre is trying to do and what the story is trying to do. I guess my question I want to get around to is, do you think there's an ideology in Golden Age science fiction? Do you think there's an ideology in New Wave science fiction? What's the difference? Earlier you said it might only be style. Now we're at a boring hotel. But it seems like there might be kind of a big idea going on here. And that's why Harlan Ellison is getting all of these authors together, trying to make this new club, do something new with sci-fi, not just a new tone, but maybe new ideas that are counter or maybe satire of the old ideas. And I feel like that is often how a new art form emerges. We were looking at Gothic horror stories and how it comes out of the Romantic Age, which comes out of Victorian Age. And we have this kind of turning against while still using old tropes and almost satirizing them, but then it becomes so much its own, it does become New Wave, or it becomes the new movement. But do you feel, is there a sense to you from what we've read for Golden Age and what we've read for New Wave, are they competing ideologies?
I feel like I haven't read enough. That's the problem. It's so hard to make broad statements.
Can't sweep a claim here, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so we've read our two stories in this anthology, and then we've read other writers like Philip K. Dick together for our audio podcast. His collaboration with Roger Zelazny. I guess we might fold in Alfred Bester in there, but yeah, I don't know. It just seems like maybe a bit of, I don't know. This is the kind of question that I think we need to leave open for a while, and just kind of return to and see what we think at the end of this anthology, and also maybe read a little bit more Golden Age science fiction too.
For sure, yeah. We need to be able to have enough evidence to really effectively compare these two things. So we're going to put that on the table for now, or put that on the back burner, that question. But I'm really curious about how movements start. I think it's very interesting. And in Golden Age, there's lots of these guys working together. In New Wave, lots of these writers are working together, but a lot of them cross over. So far, the three writers that we've read in a row, all were Golden Age guys, and now they're coming over to New Wave, and Harlan Ellison has asked them to participate. But I was looking up some history. So, the Golden Age stuff starts with Hugo Gernsback. In 1908, he starts Modern Electronics, and he's sneaking in little bits of science fiction stories that he's writing, eventually invites other people. 26, he gets amazing stories going, and that's when it kind of kicks off the burgeoning start of science fiction. But here, I thought this was very interesting. The Hydra Club is something that starts right after World War II. It starts in New York, and it's named for 9 original members. And some of these original members were Lester Del Rey, Isaac Asimov, Avram Davidson, and now Frederik Pohl, too. And they're all working together, supporting each other's work, trying to get each other published. And I just think that is so interesting that Harlan Ellison is doing something similar now in an anthology and saying, look, our project is to write dangerous visions. We're rebooting, or at least starting a new science fiction. What do you think? Does that kind of movement, does an artistic movement really need like a small group to get it going? Or is it more random?
That's a really good question. I like the idea of them, I guess you could say, cross-pollinating off of each other. We just read The Inklings by Humphrey Carpenter, which was about the group that J.R.R. Tolkien was in with C.S. Lewis and Charles Williams. And one of the things that I found interesting about that was that it wasn't simple. It wasn't simple lines of influence. It was quite complex in the sense of, from the way he tells it, no one really appreciated anyone else's feedback, if that makes sense. No one, it seemed like more they were willing to define each other by what they weren't. Oh, Williams is going to do that. Oh, C.S. Lewis, I hate that he's doing this. But that act of, I suppose, defining yourself against your fellow writer somehow seemed to inspire some level of competition and creativity that drove these people forward. So this is a very roundabout way to say that I would be interested in learning more about how this group of 9 people, the Hydra Club, what their social dynamic was and how successful people were at their goals of writing and publishing.
How did it all go? What was really happening? I'm interested to keep an eye on that too for any genre that we're reading. And I feel like Tolkien is a great example. I'm not so sure. I think C.S. Lewis really liked Tolkien's goal, but I think Tolkien was the guy who said, look, I want to write mythology, and I want to write fully fledged mythology. I want it to be as potent as the originals that I've read, thousands of years old, and I'm going to make my own world. He creates fantasy. He is the father of fantasy fiction. There are predecessors, but they didn't do it quite as deliberately and quite as, I guess, fully formed as what Tolkien eventually gives us. And I think that is also, we've seen that in horror too with Horace Walpole. It's not just, these authors start to write something kind of weird and then we name it in one movement. I think it's very deliberate. When one or two authors says, look, I want to change the way we do things, there's some sort of intense level of inspiration that pushes them forward, and they know that's the right idea. And I think that's what Harlan Ellison is trying to do, or he's inspired by something and he wants to move science fiction away from whatever he didn't like before. And I think I really am enjoying this collection, and I think it is a very important anthology. It's not just an anthology, it's a movement, I feel.
We got, 30 more stories left in the anthology?
Yeah.
So, I would say we're probably
Can't make any conclusions yet.
Start. Yeah. We're off to a good start. I'm excited to see where it goes. Talk to you later, Bob.
Talk to you later, Zach.